The native people were a soft-going, comfortable, living people. When the non-native people got here, they took our lands off of us. Like you see, they traded us for blankets and beads and what have you, trinkets.
I figured if we gave a few blankets to the chief, who was the important person, everyone would fall into line.
It's been a struggle. I think that's probably the key word that I think of when I know what our people have gone through.
Do you honestly think that every treaty was signed with the intent to give up all their land? No.
We heard from legends what was going to happen. We heard stories since 1600s of what was happening in the East and knew it was going to come here. So we thought we were prepared for this visitation, for the new visitors. But we found that we were very wrong about how it was going to proceed.
It was through a book, his history book, which you'll find in the museum. It describes a person, to begin with, going to visit his relatives in Victoria, which is Victoria today. When he got there, he noticed they were importing dark rocks.
Hudson's Bay Company. They came here because they heard there was coal in the ground.
Once it was confirmed, Douglas said, "Do not disturb the way, the lifestyle of the natives. Do not incite anything." The railroad was built very quickly. Thus Nanaimo was born. It was just another village. Nanaimo was just another village.
The Douglas Treaties were a series of treaties, about 13 of them signed around Vancouver Island in the early 1850s. They're very simple treaties. They actually were originally, believe it or not, signed on blank pieces of paper, and the words of the treaty were typed in afterwards. Basically, the government promised the Douglas Treaty nations that they would have fishing rights, the right to fish as formerly, the right to hunt on unoccupied Crown land, and that their village sites and enclosed fields would be protected. And as a trade-off, the government at least wrote in, although we think they didn't really explain it, that the First Nations were expected to give up their Aboriginal claims to certain areas of land that were described in the treaty.
The Douglas Treaty, from my understanding of the Douglas Treaty, is our ancestors did not intend to surrender any land. It was a treaty to live together with the new settlers.
In order to do the trade that they needed to do, they needed to have security. So they signed a peace treaty.
Our thinking was that we're going to be considered equal.
What our people thought was good for them was not good for them at all, but good for the government.
When these treaties were signed by our chiefs at the time, we signed just blank letters, blank lines. The wording wasn't in transit from Britain or London on a ship.
They signed the Douglas Treaty in 1854 in Nanaimo, but when they signed that particular treaty, there was no text to the treaty itself.
When the words got here, they just joined the Douglas Treaty to the signatures. So we didn't actually know what we were signing.
If you ever have a blank check signed and You know what the ramifications are of that?
They made it up later on after it was the way they wanted it.
From the point of view of what the government says about the treaty now, there are real problems with the way the Douglas treaties were signed. The government says that the nations gave up essentially all of their lands, but the reality is that there was no clear explanation given. Governor Douglas was speaking English, the translations were poor, undoubtedly, the legal concepts weren't explained, and the amounts paid to the nations were trivial. In fact, out at Souk, they gave out blankets, and there were so few blankets to give out, they actually had to tear them in half to distribute them. There was one judge almost 30 years ago now, in a case involving Souk, who actually described the treaties as being somewhat like larceny, which is an old word for theft.
If our ancestors knew exactly what those terms were, they wouldn't have honored that. They wouldn't have accepted that.
Can we say it was there was skullduggery involved? Maybe not knowingly, but it certainly was there.
I think the people that signed the treaty probably thought that they were negotiating the rights to hunt and fish forever, the rights to occupy their land forever. I don't think they were selling their land for a bunch of beads and some blankets.
The government itself had come up with the idea of maybe 6 blankets to the heads of the families of this Channel people for all this land that has been taken away from us. I mean, it's robbery.
If they were told that they were giving up their land, I can't imagine that they would be so willing to sign.
They were unfamiliar with written word, and often believed that the words that someone was speaking was like the stars, indelible, and would burn forever.
You look at the laws of today when you deal with consultation and accommodation. You have to ask everyone, and you have to be sure that everyone understands that what they're dealing with is the message is getting to them. I don't see that happening when it was first signed, the Douglas Treaty itself.
At that time, the language that people used to communicate with each other was mainly Chinook, which is a trade jargon. It wouldn't have the subtleties involved in a negotiation. It would be mainly, do you want to buy this or not? Do you want to go to Victoria or not?
If you can't communicate with somebody appropriately and you can't understand the language and they can't understand yours, how can you truly write contracts?
It's taken under false pretenses, I would think, because of the language barrier.
The reasons for doing that, for giving us a blank piece of paper and putting our X on it, or supposedly put an X on it, and then filling it later. To me, there's a hidden agenda behind that.
The governments put that on the shelf, and we were, I guess, what you would call it, seen to be breaking the law and taken to court and paying fines over many years before we found this Douglas Treaty. And naturally we had to take it to court.
The Douglas Treaty surfaced because the 2 boys were charged way back when.
That's the Bob and White case. My father and actually my granduncle, Clifford White, went out hunting and they got caught.
There was a time where people were sent to Ocala for practicing this.
Ocala, from my recollection, was a prison on the mainland.
Some of them got 6-month sentences, some less, some more, that came from where I immediately come from. They were actually put in Ocala.
Well, we always hunted all our lives. We hunted for the elders and the people that couldn't afford to buy any meat. We'd bring it home and cut it up and divide it up and deliver it. They'd give us a little gas money to go back up and get some more. We done it, and the warden started chasing us around, so we said, okay, enough is enough. We'll go up and we'll get caught.
See, I didn't go overboard. I got what I needed. But the Greenfields grabbed us and took us in.
And sure enough, we went up that morning and coming down off of Benson there's old Frank Greenfield and 3 or 4 RCMP officers.
I'd say Greenfields was a man that was prejudiced. Prejudiced, you know what I mean? And he was prejudiced. He wasn't taught how to be equal. You know, treat us equal, the same as him.
We got to Ocala and a woman by the name of Measy Hurley got there and she said, "Don't want you talking to nobody, not even the guards. You just zipper your mouth."
Wilson Bob at the time was our chief, and he was quite strong on the Douglas Treaty, and is still strong. Took it on, fought it, and used the Douglas Treaty.
A man by the name of Mr. Tom Berger got there and asked some questions, and "You want to go through with this?" "Yes." "You want to go all the way with it?" "Yes." "Great, we're going."
It was exciting in the sense that it was finally dealing with a strong issue.
Didn't sound too good for us, but he fought it on. And it took 3 years. 3 solid years of fighting it.
Provincial laws weren't applicable to the Douglas Treaty.
Charges were dropped. It was now revealed that this was law, entrenched.
It was so gratifying to hear the judges say, this is their given right to fish and hunt 12 months of the year.
That is the biggie. That brings back what was rightfully their right to begin with, because that's the way it always has been.
You know, it's a great thing that the Douglas Treaty was there, we'd have lost it.
Since the revelation of the Douglas Treaty, it has enhanced probably a large part of my spiritual being, that I can go back to the forest without being afraid. That's the essence, that's the bottom line. Because prior to that, you would be a criminal. It's being out and touching Mother Earth. He will attest to the fact that when I'm out there, I'll sing songs. I'm out there with Mother Nature, the lakes, the trees, away from the concrete jungle. For me, it's invigorating. It's a renewal, it's a break from this rat race.
The exact words of the Douglas Treaty, and they're not very long, essentially they promise you the right to fish as formerly. So, and there's some fight about what that means, but we understand that to mean to fish the way that you fished before the Douglas Treaties were signed. And that means if you are fishing and selling your fish, you can fish and sell your fish. If you are fishing in your territories, you can fish in your territories. And also that if you were doing things that changed over time, that you can keep on doing things to deal with the changing circumstances. The second thing that's promised is the right to hunt on unoccupied land. So unoccupied land, the courts have said, means crown land that isn't being used for other purposes. It also means private property that isn't fenced, but it doesn't include private property that has houses built on it or new buildings built on it. And the third right that's protected is the right to your village sites and enclosed fields. And again, that certainly includes the land that is in the present reserves, but it probably includes other lands that were village sites in the 1850s and maybe a bit before.
I guess right now we're lucky that he actually did put in there that we could hunt and fish on occupied land.
We don't have to have licenses to go fishing or hunting.
I used to at one time bought it, but my elders give me heck for using it because they say once you buy a license, you're going to screw up the rights we have already for everybody else.
It is our treaty right to hunt whenever we need it.
That's why the white man's got our land now. They give it up for this treaty.
It's an individual right that the individuals have to exercise themselves, and that's what I've been doing all my life, is exercise my right to fish.
You know, my father just said, you got the right to do it, just do it.
My time as a young boy growing up here, I did a lot of hunting and fishing.
It came with being a boy that we had to learn how to fish and hunt.
Well, this last few years I haven't hunted. Ever since it's become legal for me to go hunting anytime during the week, I have never bothered. I guess I like breaking law more.
There's been only one case about trading and bartering under the Douglas Treaty, and that involved the treaty up at the north end of the island, where a court said that there wasn't a right to sell fish commercially. I suspect that if this same case were fought in Victoria, for example with the Songhees Treaty or the Souk Treaty, there'd actually be a good case to be made that right from the first days that Europeans and Aboriginal people met, there was trade going on, that it was commercial trade, that there was sale of fish happening. And since the Douglas Treaty suggests that they'd be able to do what they were doing before they signed the treaty, my own view is that a court would say that there is a right to sell.
Our economy was already in place and was thriving. It was set up for all our nations and other nations that came down to our territory for bartering and trading.
Somebody that I know several years back was fishing, and this was on the mainland, but it's no different, say, from here. She was fishing and she was trying to sell her fish. And she was explaining to the media, well, what's the difference in me selling the fish and then going to buy stuff that I want to eat? She was explaining, why should I have to just eat fish? So there was a big controversy around that people were fishing and selling it.
Over the years, we've seen the right to sell commercially, and that's only been within my lifetime, taken away.
Even though I was under the Douglas Treaty, I could sell fish to a company called the BC Packers. I was here to wait for our people to catch fish and then bring it over to the boat and sell them for $1 a piece or something like that.
Oh, it was quite common and certainly documented at the time that our ancestors were trading with the boats that were sailing around here, and that's how they found out our oceans were full of fish.
We were always glove in hand with the neighboring place either by marriage or by resource.
There was no money then, right? So you had to use your resources to live, and yeah, of course you had to barter trade and sell.
At one time, this bay, for example, used to look across it, and it used to be thriving. It used to be silvery. It used to be that so many fish coming in this bay. Now all you can see is the waves.
I'm really against herring fishing because herring is bottom of the food chain. Everything in that ocean relies on herring. At one time, growing up here as a young fella, if you could walk on herring, you could walk across the bay. It was that many. But now, like we were discussing earlier, there isn't any.
You have a heron spawn fishery that services a Japanese market, and the eggs that these herring spawn sustain their continuance. But when they're being taken away and sold, no wonder we don't have any fish. No wonder we don't have any more herring.
It's all about the mighty dollar. And what happens in the future, they don't care. Where, on the other hand, we're totally different. We care what happens to the future because we want our kids and our grandkids to have and taste what we have tasted in our life.
Well, I could remember my dad telling me that his oldest brother, Sam, would start paddling, take a rowboat, start at the beginning of the mouth of the bay and row down to the end and back again, make 4 trips and come back with a canoe full of coho. Now, you can take a power boat and go back and forth for a month and be lucky if you get a nibble.
I gave up trolling about 5 years ago, trolling for salmon, because all I was doing was burning gas, going, looking and going trying here and trying there, and no fish. And my parents, who grew up on fish, wanted fish, so I figured the only fish that I could catch was cod.
Here's my story. I'm a sports fisherman. There was big things going on in the sports fishing industry where everything was getting taken from the sports fishermen. I went to a meeting which I thought was going to help the sports industry, save the industry, or whatever it is we were going to do. I don't know. I just went. When I got there, the story started. I saw some Indians fishing. Here, why aren't we fishing? I saw another. The whole group just, there's hundreds of people. They're all talking about how they saw these Indians fishing. And they're all talking about the same 2 guys. But yet it perceived as 100 different people. And I was tired that day because I'd been out fishing in the morning. And while I was out fishing, hundreds of commercial fishing boats went by me. Hundreds. And no one said anything about that.
The management of Department of Fisheries is so bad there. They're turning the west coast of Canada into the east coast of Canada where there's no fish, and they overfish and overfish and overfish, and then they wonder why there's no fish, and we as the First Nations people of this country should have a hand in that management.
Where we used to be able to go walking up behind our village, we can't anymore because there's homes developed along there. It's like a barrier for us. We can't go across that because it's occupied land into the unoccupied land.
Everywhere around us has been turned into a park or a parking lot, and the rights not getting taken away, but the places to practice those rights are getting taken away.
We were given the right to hunt and fish, but we don't have any place to hunt here anymore.
In our local areas, Fernandez, across here, across the bay was one of our main hunting grounds. Now there's a golf course and multi-million-dollar subdivision over there. Behind us, we're circled by subdivision right now.
You know, we lived there. We hunted there. We picked berries there. We sustained ourselves on that land.
I talked to my dad when he was alive. I said, you know, you go up hunting when you were young. What was it like? He said, I didn't have to go up very far and I'd come home with one. Now I go out all day and I see nothing.
There was an older fellow that came in from fishing. He had some fish in his boat. He was native, and my mom was the chief at the time. And the guy had to go to the bathroom. And fisheries officers had him pulled over at the docks, and he said, "Look, I just got to go to the bathroom. Will you just let me go? I know you want to search my boat. You guys can search my boat all you want." He opened his, "I got to go to the bathroom." And they didn't let him go until he actually went in his pants. And then they just left. And actually, they took his fish. It was a spring that was like half an inch too small. And I think it was in his boat because he had to go to the bathroom. I think it was the last thing he was doing was pulling his fish and just didn't check back. It was a pretty sad state.
I was going to work in logging when we lived in Souk, and when on the weekend on Sunday I told Jimmy and Frankie, my two sons, to go down the river and get me some salmon for the smokehouse. I said, I got to go to work. You guys go get me some fish. A dozen. I only need a dozen for the smokehouse. Okay, Dad, we'll do that. So they goes down to Stony Creek down here in Cecina, and he goes up the river and hook them like we traditionally do all the time. And he clubbed them and hung them on the side of the bank, and he was gabbing these fish out of the river. And who come down to DFO, Stevens was his name. And he told him, "What are you guys doing?" He says, "I'm fishing fish with the focus with my dad." "Oh no, you can't do that." He said, "You can't fish above the bridge." And he was making his own rules, eh? So he took the 12 fish away from the boys. So I come home from work and I said, "Where's my fish?" "Oh, the fishery guy took it away." He said, I said, "Okay, I'll fix that guy." So I phoned his boss in because I knew him quite well, eh? And I ripped right into him. I said, "What are you trying to do here?" I said, "I sent the boys to get me fish for my smokehouse and I want to see them fish brought back to me right now. If not, I'll meet you in the biggest court in Canada or BC if we have to take it that far. Because we have a Douglas Treaty right to do this." Half an hour later, the fishery guy come running up the driveway with his fish in the back of his truck. "And here's your fish, Jack." And he says, "I got to apologize to you." I said, "You bloody well better." I said, and his face was red. He was just like it was his fish or something, you know. But he did apologize and give me my fish and drove away.
Our people are constantly being harassed by DFO, Department of Fisheries, and Fish and Game are harassing our hunters. So yeah, it's certainly gone unrecognized.
I practice my Douglas Treaty rights as formally, like I say, and DFO and the conservation officers, they won't bother me. They see me out fishing, they know I'm practicing my rights, and they see my boat fishing or me hunting in the hills. They don't even ask questions to me. But if my younger people go out on their own, they pick on them.
They do treat the younger guys different.
I'm the one that sends them out to hunt and fish for me, and yet they're the ones they target.
Some of our young people are scared to go fishing just because they don't want to get their stuff taken.
Too many times families have been raided their homes and taken all the meat out of their freezer, even if it wasn't wildlife. It was hamburger, bacon, and stuff like that. They hauled it all away for about a month before they bring it back. And we don't know what they done to it while they had it, you know.
It's a very, very hard thing to bring it out in the open. And it's a very hard thing to say, well, I know where to go to get some answers. You don't.
my goal is to see them leave us alone on that, you know, to do that. One family was on welfare in Duncan. They done that to him and took everything he had in the freezer, even what he bought at the stores. And he had nothing left to eat all that month because he was on welfare. And they didn't care.
They sort of have their thumbs on us, and that's where they'll keep us. The quieter we are, the better they like it.
I would take the Indian Act as more of an oppression suppression act as opposed to looking after us in our best interest.
As far as the community is concerned, it really suppressed the people into dependency, depending on the Indian Act to do things, taking away the initiative of the people and replacing it with, yes, I need Indian Affairs.
It's supposed to be in our best interest, and it seems to be in their best interest. And it's old school politicians who are still in some of the reins that keep the oppression suppression going.
A lot of their retirees, pundits, get to head up departments in Indian Affairs. And so it's more like a retirement package for people that have been good to the government.
When you think of the people that look after the Indians through the Indian Affairs Department, they say there's $10 billion put aside for Indian Affairs every budget year. The first guy that reaches into the bucket is the Minister of Indian Affairs, his secretary and his staff, and all the other branches that come off of that. And then you go into the provincial. They all have to go in and get their dips as well. How much reaches the village?
I think we're fighting for rights that they're spending money on outside of Canada to give people rights to do when they haven't even negotiated those rights properly with us.
I should be exercising those rights, and I should have a life that is a comfortable life, and not one that's been restricted here to living on a piece of property that is owned by the Canadian government's Department of Indian Affairs. Department of Indian Affairs is the biggest realty company in all of Canada.
I believe that's all it's about, is real estate. It's plus giving their favorite people a place to earn darn good money for doing what they do, which often is just denigrating the First Nations people or making them feel as if they're doing something when they're actually just spinning their tires.
We used to live in Albert Head. We had 6 acres out there. As the civilization or non-Aboriginal encroached, they didn't want to live next to the Indians. So they talked to the Indian agent. They moved the Indians farther away. Now then, civilization occurred again. And we got moved and moved and moved until finally we're here.
Our camping and summer camps and our playing fields that are around this area are taken from us, and they did not honor that, like the Souk Flats and Within Spit, we call it Long Spit.
When you find that you live on 209 acres and you have a history of losing 3,200 acres because somebody felt that you didn't deserve those lands and they wanted them for preemption. I don't think they had any ethics. They just took what they wanted.
The government's dealt with things like the Chinese railroad. They apologized for stuff like that, made settlements all along. They're over in Iraq. Why are we still doing this? 150, 160 years from now? Why are we still negotiating? Why don't they stand up and recognize who we are and what we are?
We send away $50 billion to third world countries when we can't even look after our own third world countries in our own country.
The Indian Act is such a suppressive, oppressive system, and with a 2-year election system that basically is geared not to work.
The whole principle of assimilation, it was geared to do that, mainly because the eventual result was to not have the responsibility of looking after us.
They were saying, we want you to assimilate, but we're not going to let you fit. We're not going to let you thrive.
The manpower in Canada was so numerous that we were not needed. It's only been less than 10 years that we've been accepted in the workforce as an equal.
If you get to a labor level, good for you. That's all you're going to get. You could never go to administrative level or be a boss.
What a wonderful Indian. He's working today. And how sad it is for the First Nations person to hear that. Because often it will be repeated just to denigrate. Because somebody's in pain and hurt. And they couldn't find anyone else to beat up other than the First Nations person who's really lost anyway and needing support. And negative attention, what can you say? So we know negative attention sometimes is better than none.
Well, even today, you say people here in Canada are not prejudiced. They are prejudiced. There's no way you can get away with it, because I've experienced it many times throughout the years.
Sometimes I'd be harassed by cars that drove by throwing things at me, calling me names I didn't know.
I've spent a lot of time defending myself as opposed to being proud of who I am.
What did I do wrong that caused people to be angry with me? I wish I would know so I would stop doing it.
You see, a lot of people have changed today. I see a lot of people I've worked with people that look down on me.
If people from those other ethnic groups were to put the time that they put into racism, into understanding, things would be better.
You see me as I am. I'm a human being. Same as a white man is a human being. They want you to treat them equal. Okay, you treat them equal. When you find someone you can't, no matter what you say, it'll dawn on you. Then I say, no, don't try. Because if you do, you're going to fight with them. And it's not right to fight. You dirty your hands if you fight with them.
Our people is fought so hard to get out of this eggshell that we're in. It's pathetic.
They took the land that was cleared. They took the land that was cultivated. And it made it easy for them to settle. So we ended up with swamp. The waterfront of our current reserve was swamp. Then they preempted it for a 4-lane highway. They preempted for a railway. And then they preempted for the Lanceville Scenic Loop.
At one time, the homesteaders, they were allowed by the government to clear as much land as they want. And the more they cleared, the more they got. Fee simple, I think they call it nowadays, but I don't know what the hell the jargon is now. But as long as his homesteader kept clearing the land, it would be his. So he wrote the government, BC government, and he told them, I can't go any further because the Indians are still burying their people here. And the letter come back to him, he said, never mind that, just clear what you want, it's yours. And we found that in the journals.
I remember my grandmother telling me stories how they couldn't leave the village unless they had permission from the Indian agent. My uncle telling me they weren't allowed to vote until about the 60s. How we couldn't gather. They had more than 2 men in a room, it was illegal.
Say for examples like BC Ferries and how the First Nations people used to have to ride down below on the car deck before.
It'd almost be like if I went to the city of Ladysmith and had all my what we call Chomoch Mestimoch, our Indian people, gather and just surround Ladysmith and walk in and say, okay, you can no longer attend your church, you can no longer go to Mass, and start saying, now you're all going to have to move into this area and you stay there, and they have to ask us permission to do everything. I don't think that would go over too well.
So those times are so shorn, just sheared of all the warmth that we once had for each other, where all life was sacred.
The onslaught of the system could just overwhelm you and lead you into, like what some of our communities have done, of just give up, committed suicide, said there's no more reason to live.
There's a lot of people hurting from residential schools, and with that, there's alcoholism and drug abuse and abuse, a lot of different abuse.
The people have been affected quite personally and made adapting not just difficult but really hard.
Once they feel better, they're going to treat their kids better. Once their kids feel better, those kids are going to treat other people better. And then once everybody feels good, then it's just going to roll on to the other people. And they'll want to improve their homes. It can only get better.
We had been here for thousands of years, and we had a structure, a community structure, and a governance structure, and that's how our communities govern themselves.
Right now, we have supposedly this reserve here, but the title's held by the Queen or the Government of Canada. It's our land, but it's not our land. So if we had title to it, we can do what we want with it.
It's so restricted with the Indian Act, and it's the only time they take their fiduciary responsibility serious, and that turns into a paternalistic attitude.
The government has title to the land on our behalf. So basically they can come here and take whatever they want, and supposedly put some money away for us in our account in Ottawa.
We can't develop anything on the reserves here. We can't use anything as collateral. We can't, our hands are just shackled together.
Being confined under the Indian Act, we have been limited to what we can do. If we want to do economic development, we'd have to write to Ottawa to ask permission to do this. If we want to do housing or something, we'd have to write to Ottawa, and those procedures take a long time, maybe up to 10 years before you can even get approved.
Right now, I'm an elected chief councillor. The resources we get to run our community is very minimal. We try to get things going through economic development. We have to wait for Ottawa to say yes or no.
And they would have the veto power to tell us, no, you can't do that. And it's absurd. It takes the government that long, and in the business world, no business can wait for 18 months to maybe have a yes. And with self-government, we can forge ahead and become more self-sufficient.
That's self-government, when the people learn to take care of themselves, and we, the people they elect into these positions, are run by the people, for the people, to make things work.
Right now, the title to our land belongs to the Queen. So if she hasn't come out here and tried to develop or work her land for a while, so we need to gain those controls in order to get ahead.
Self-government will mean one day we get to stand up and say yes or no to a developer if they want to develop on our land. Not for the government to say, well, no, we won't consider that. We don't think it's good for you.
Yeah, I did talk to a Department of Indian Affairs representative many years ago where he said, Wilson, we're trying to fix up your communities so that in time we'll be able to turn off the lights, shut the door, and walk away.
There's one word in there my older brother always told me to protect, and that in the treaty it says to hunt and fish over unoccupied land as formerly. And that as formerly means that it's same as when my great-grandfather hunted and fished here.
Douglas Treaty says we have the right to fish as formerly. So it's important that it remains as part of the treaty, or the head of our treaty, and the rest is the addendum, all the governance issues and the education agreements, and all those are going to be body to that treaty, protected under the Constitution of Canada.
Now, this doesn't sound like a lot, but the protection given by the Canadian Constitution gives these people two things. First of all, it means that the government can't limit their rights unreasonably and has to give their rights priority over the rights of other people. So if there's not enough elk, say, to go around, what the government is supposed to be doing is making sure that the people in the Douglas Treaty have their rights to harvest elk served first. But the other thing that the treaties do, and this is something the Supreme Court of Canada said quite recently, is that it also protects the rights from provincial interference. The province's laws can't actually cut back on your treaty rights or limit them in the way that the federal government's laws can. So it really gives you a double-barrel protection. It lets you, it protects your rights from any government interfering with them unreasonably, and it protects your rights from being interfered with by the province at all.
Well, the Douglas Treaty is something we got to hang on to, and hang on for dear life.
Will not put Douglas Treaty on the table for any negotiations. And as much as a lot of people would like to see that happen, it's not going to happen.
Well, we've got our rights now. If they take that away from us, we'll be sorry.
Without that Douglas Treaty, they can tell us to go, you know where. They don't recognize us, or they don't want to recognize us. But once we bring the Douglas Treaty into the picture, different story. They have to listen. They have to understand who we are and what we are.
This Douglas Treaty they talk about that they negotiated in good faith has a lot of holes in it. And I think they have to really look at that, because we're looking at another treaty now.
The wording of it needs to be more clearly defined. And that's what they're working on in the treaty process.
Even the language that's on the documents that everybody sees now is so strong that we would never get stronger language in our modern day treaty.
Well, I think probably the most important thing to keep in mind is that the Douglas treaties give everybody at Tomahawk a good basis, a good strong basis on which to negotiate a modern treaty. It gives you rights which, perhaps in the modern era have to be figured out, and we have to go back in history a bit to understand them. But it gives you a real assurance that you do have rights now, and what you're doing now is dealing with the government to make sure that those rights can mean something real in the community today. And this is all about your nation standing up and having a political say about what your rights should look like in the future, and that it not just is something that's going to be fought out in the courts or dealt with by lawyers. It's really about having a modern government-to-government relationship where you can take your Douglas Treaty rights and go to the governments and saying, this is what we have, and we want you to negotiate with us fairly about how things are going to work in the future.
So we have to continue to look at what we had before as a strength, but not looking at this Douglas Treaty as a detriment. But it would be one of those pegs of hope that we can hang on to.
Our Coast Salish people and the West Coast people, we have naming ceremonies. They hand down their names to your family. That's your true identity.
My name is Leochten, from the Coast Salish people.
Hukwacha.
My Indian name is Sanimton.
Himalk.
My traditional name is Hayakwacha.
Lachichalak.
Spartanat.
And my Indian name is Tlungath.
Dawasib.
Swalmoston.
4 years later, I got another name, Nunchapa, from my mother's side.
We're trying to teach our children now that they have to grasp our culture, hang on to it, remember who they are, where they come from, like I had described my name, but also at the same time get their education. And I heard this professor in Alberta one time say it, I think his name was Broken Arm. He said, we have to teach our children, tell them this story, that it's like a bird, a baby bird. It's got to learn to use both wings before it can leave the nest. If it doesn't, it only uses one wing, it'll never fly. So that's what we got to tell our children, that they have to grab both worlds, which is very difficult.
You've got to learn both, and you've got to keep it separate.
There's going to have to be a balance. How one balances that is entirely up to an individual. You can't make people do what they don't want to do.
And one thing I want them to do is learn their language. It's not hard. Not hard to learn. You learn how to speak Indian. You learn how to speak Indian, you become Indian. You become an Indian fella. You change inside.
It's imperative to know the language that you come from. It empowers you as to who you really are.
It's the path or the door that opens up their mind to the way the way we think and how we learn.
You learn your Indian language, you're going to bring your Indian alive here in your heart. You're going to bring your Indian alive.
The more I learn about our language and how we're connected to the earth, sounds very simplistic, but it's very complicated. And but it's also very energizing, powerful, and helps the way of thinking and learning and appreciating life.
You see, my people, in their time, they used to teach the boys, the men, how to do things the best way they know how. But then the white man come along, they overcome that. They overcome everything, our language, our culture, everything. They overcome it. See, our language, you see, I go to an old timer, I talk Indian to them. Instead of talking to me Indian, they talk to me in English. They threw their language out the window. I don't know why. No, I don't bother asking them. I just quit and I start talking English.
My parents and that generation were told and forced not to speak their language, and then when they got out of the school and came home and started having kids, that language wasn't passed on to all of us, and it's important because it's who we are.
When you lose your language, part of the race disappears.
Right now I've lost a lot of my language. I used to speak it a lot, but not anymore. No. Because it's not used by the native people anymore.
It's really important, crucial, critical that we do get back to learning our language.
Well, the young people of today, if you could reach them, you'll accomplish something. But if you can't reach them, there's nothing you can do. Well, I'd like to see them reach out for their culture and their heritage. Reach out for it and learn it. Once they learn it, they'll go on as Indians. Because as long as they live, it doesn't matter what the white man say, they will always be an Indian. I will always be an Indian. Like I'll be an Indian until the day I die. I'm not ashamed of it.
I'm 40, but it seems like it just came out of youth, and I felt lost while I was growing up. So I think the uncertainty that's left in that community, that some of the younger people don't know where to go, don't know what it is we're doing. I think that's why the last 150 or 60 years of figuring out what to do with the Douglas Treaty or negotiating new treaties has left us lost. I think some of the youth are lost.
If you have a life and you don't preserve it, what hope is there for the next generation?
I'd like to say to the kids in Beecher Bay, because of the residential schools, that we are able now to break the cycle. We know what's happened. We're speaking out. People are speaking out. There are some people who aren't speaking out, but other people are speaking for them. And I just want them to know that we can break the cycle of abuse that's happening, and that things can be better, and that they can respect themselves, and we will respect them.
I want the significance of an individual born into Nanoose to be special, to know that they are special, and to have the opportunity to find a place here.
I believe that we need to find an understanding of who we once were and return back to that. I spoke about love of nature, love of other people, love of creatures, whether they were crawling, and four legs, two-legged, winged, fin, where that bond is returned to us.
Once we get our economic development going, then we can tell our young people, okay, now what do you want to be? You want to be a lawyer, a doctor, a fireman, a biologist, or whatever you want to be. You go into that field and we'll pay for it. Because sooner or later, our nation is going to need expertise in some fields, and that's what I want to see is having us be self-sufficient so my grandkids can just carry on with their education. Education is knowledge, and knowledge is power.
To walk abreast of the rest of society, you've got to be prepared. And that means going as far as you can in school.
We need more educated people, men and women, to take care of this First Nation when we're all gone. We won't be here forever. I won't be anyway. And they can look after the business affairs of our First Nation.
They're going to be required in the implementation of the treaty with their education. They're going to be the people that are going to have to live with it. So it's a serious goal for the young people in order to get an education. It's important.
Find your niche in life. That's up there.
Look after our land. Get an education. Keep moving forward. Don't look back. Because you can't look back. And you can't change the past.
Be strong. Be confident. Know who you are. Know where you come from. And be proud.
Don't just learn to hunt and fish. Learn why you can hunt and fish.
They said we didn't have that right, and it's up to them to control us. They couldn't hunt and fish until we started fighting for our rights, and we made it happen. And to this day, I'm still making it happen, and I will be until I'm gone. But when I'm gone, I want my younger people to carry on it warmly, like our treaty says, and keep it going. That's something that our forefathers give us for our future.
I think it's about the whole story.